The dust swirled around Natalie Graham's worn boots as she stepped off the afternoon stage into Silver Peak, Nevada, carrying nothing but a leather satchel and a desperate plan that could either save her family ranch or destroy what remained of her reputation. It was late spring in 1882, and the high desert town buzzed with the kind of energy that came from silver strikes and broken dreams. Natalie had traveled 3 days from her family's failing cattle ranch in Wyoming, following a carefully worded telegram from a lawyer named Henderson, who claimed he had a solution to her predicament. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind mountains of debt and a property that creditors circled like vultures. Her mother had taken ill from grief, and at 23 years old, Natalie found herself the sole person standing between her family's legacy and complete ruin. The lawyer's office sat above the mercantile, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked under her weight. Henderson was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles who looked her up and down with an assessing gaze that made her spine straighten defensively. "Miss Graham," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his cluttered desk, "I trust your journey was tolerable." "It was long," she replied, settling into the seat with as much dignity as she could muster in her travel-stained dress. "Your telegram mentioned a business proposition that could resolve my financial difficulties. I would appreciate if you would explain the details." Henderson steepled his fingers, his expression carefully neutral. "There is a man in this town who requires a wife. Not for romantic purposes, you understand, but for purely practical reasons. His name is Ethan Rutherford, and he owns one of the most profitable cattle operations in Nevada. However, there are certain business interests, certain land acquisitions and water rights that require him to present as a settled, married man. The territorial governor and the land office look more favorably upon family men when granting such permits." Natalie felt her stomach tighten. "You are suggesting I enter into a marriage of convenience with a complete stranger." "I am suggesting a business arrangement that would benefit both parties considerably," Henderson corrected smoothly. "Mr. Rutherford is prepared to pay off all debts associated with your family property in Wyoming, plus provide you with a monthly stipend of $100 for the duration of the arrangement. You would live separately, maintain separate quarters on his ranch, and the marriage would be in name only. After 2 years, once his business dealings are finalized, you would receive a divorce settlement of $5,000 and be free to return to your life." The sum was staggering. $5,000 would not only save her mother and their home but provide enough security for years to come. Natalie's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in her lap. "What kind of man requires such an arrangement?" she asked carefully. "Why can he not simply court and marry someone properly?" Henderson's lips thinned. "Mr. Rutherford is a businessman first and foremost. He has no interest in the complications of romantic entanglement. He requires efficiency and discretion. I have assured him that you are a woman of good character who understands the value of a mutually beneficial agreement." Natalie wanted to feel insulted, but desperation had a way of dulling pride. "I would need to meet him before agreeing to anything." "Of course. He is expecting you at his ranch tomorrow morning. The property is called the Double R, about 5 miles west of town." Henderson pushed a piece of paper across the desk. "Here is a map and a letter of introduction. I have taken the liberty of securing you a room at the boarding house for tonight." As Natalie walked through the dusty streets toward the boarding house, clutching the precious papers, she tried to imagine what kind of man would propose such a cold arrangement. She pictured someone old, perhaps, or cruel-faced, someone who had been rejected so many times that he had given up on genuine affection entirely. The thought made her chest ache with a loneliness she tried hard not to examine too closely. The boarding house was run by a cheerful woman named Mrs. Chen, who showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. After washing away the travel dust and changing into her only other presentable dress, a navy cotton with modest lace at the collar, Natalie descended to the dining room for supper. Several other boarders sat at the long table, and conversation flowed around her like a river. She learned that Silver Peak had boomed 3 years ago when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, that the town now boasted 2 saloons, a proper church, a school, and even a small opera house. She also learned, through carefully casual questions, that Ethan Rutherford was considered one of the most eligible bachelors in the territory. "Shame about him staying single," said a man in a dusty suit who introduced himself as a mine surveyor. "Good-looking fellow, keeps to himself mostly. Built that ranch up from nothing after the war." "The war?" Natalie asked. "Confederate cavalry," the surveyor said, lowering his voice slightly. "Don't hold it against him myself, but some folks have long memories. He came west in '66, worked as a ranch hand for old man Cooper, bought the land when Cooper died. Now he runs more head of cattle than anyone else in 3 counties. That night, Natalie lay awake on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what morning would bring. She thought of her mother back in Wyoming, growing frailer each day, and knew she had no real choice. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Dawn came too quickly. After a simple breakfast of eggs and biscuits, Natalie borrowed a horse from Mrs. Chen's stable and followed the map westward out of town. The high desert landscape stretched endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Sagebrush and scrubby juniper dotted the rocky earth, and in the distance, mountains rose like purple shadows. The double R announced itself with a well-maintained wooden gate and a long drive lined with cottonwood trees that must have been painstakingly irrigated in this dry country. The ranch house came into view, and Natalie felt her eyebrows rise in surprise. She had expected something rough and utilitarian, but the building before her was a proper 2-story structure with a wide porch and real glass windows. Outbuildings dotted the property, all in good repair, and she could see cattle grazing in distant pastures where green grass somehow grew despite the arid climate. She tied her borrowed horse to the hitching post and climbed the porch steps, her heart hammering against her ribs. Before she could knock, the door swung open, and she found herself looking up at the man who had proposed this strange arrangement. Ethan Rutherford was nothing like she had imagined. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dark shirt in a way that made her mouth go dry. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, curling just above his collar, and his eyes were in startling shade of green that seemed to look straight through her. He was perhaps 28 or 30, his face sun-bronzed and angular, with a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He was quite simply one of the most handsome men she had ever seen. "Miss Graham," he said, his voice low and rough like whiskey over gravel. "I am Ethan Rutherford. Please come in." She followed him into a surprisingly well-appointed parlor with leather furniture and Navajo rugs on the polished wooden floors. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and books lined built-in shelves on either side. Everything spoke of success and careful taste. "Would you like coffee?" he asked, gesturing to a pot sitting on a side table. "Yes, thank you." She needed something to do with her hands. He poured 2 cups with movements that were economical and precise, then handed her one and settled into the chair across from her. For a long moment they studied each other in silence. Henderson explained the arrangement, Ethan finally asked. He did. Natalie took a sip of coffee, grateful it was strong and hot. though I confess I find the entire situation somewhat unusual. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his green eyes. That is a diplomatic way of putting it. Why me? She asked bluntly. There must be women closer by who would accept such an offer. There are, he agreed, but they all have families here, connections, expectations. Word would spread and the pretense would be exposed. You are from Wyoming with no ties to this area. It will be easier to maintain the illusion. The illusion that we are a normal married couple. Precisely. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I will not lie to you, Miss Graham. I need this marriage to secure water rights that will determine whether my ranch survives the next drought. The territorial governor is a religious man who believes in family values. A bachelor trying to claim creek access for grazing land will be viewed with suspicion. A married man building a future for his family will be seen as industrious and worthy. And after you have your water rights, after 2 years, we will quietly divorce. You will be well compensated and free to go wherever you choose. I am offering you a business transaction, nothing more. Natalie set down her cup. Henderson mentioned I would have separate quarters. The eastern wing of the house, Ethan confirmed. 3 rooms, completely private, I keep to the western side. We would only need to appear together for social functions and when anyone from town visits. And you expect nothing else from me? No wifely duties of any kind, a muscle ticked in his jaw. I expect discretion and cooperation in maintaining appearances. Nothing more. She should have felt relieved. Instead, something almost like disappointment curled in her stomach. She pushed the feeling away firmly. This was business, as he said. Romance had no place in desperation. If I agree, she said slowly, I would need the debts cleared before the wedding and a contract specifying all terms in writing. Henderson will draw up the papers today. Ethan stood, towering over her. Do we have an agreement? Natalie rose as well, squaring her shoulders. We do, though I have one additional condition. His eyebrow arched. Which is? I will not lie to my mother about the nature of this marriage. She is too ill to travel to any wedding, but I will not have her die believing I married for money alone. I will write her that this began as a business arrangement, but that we are making the best of it. For the first time, something like warmth touched his features. That seems fair enough. When can you be ready for the ceremony? How soon do you need this done? The governor visits in 3 weeks to review my petition. I would like to present you as my wife by then. Then I suppose we should marry within the week, Natalie said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. That will give us time to establish our story. Ethan extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she shook it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. Something electric seemed to pass between them at the contact, and she pulled back quickly, unsettled. I will have Henderson finalize the contracts, Ethan said, his voice slightly rougher than before. And I will send word to the minister. Shall we say Friday afternoon? Friday, she agreed, feeling as though she had just stepped off a cliff into unknown waters. The next 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and preparation. True to his word, Ethan had Henderson transfer funds to clear every debt associated with her family ranch in Wyoming. Natalie sent a carefully worded telegram to her mother's neighbor, asking her to read it aloud, explaining that she had met a rancher and would be married within the week. It was not exactly a lie, she told herself, just a significant omission of truth. She bought 2 new dresses with money Ethan had provided, one a simple cream-colored cotton with blue ribbons that would serve for the wedding, and another a practical dark green for everyday wear. Mrs. Chen clucked over her like a hen, insisting on styling her honey-colored hair into an elegant arrangement for the ceremony. Friday arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures that climbed steadily as the sun rose higher. Natalie dressed in her cream gown, staring at her reflection in the small mirror and trying to recognize the woman looking back. Her hazel eyes looked enormous in her pale face, and her hands shook as she pinned a small silk flower into her hair. The ceremony took place in the church at 2 o'clock, with Henderson and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. The minister was an older man with kind eyes who seemed pleased to be marrying off the town's most eligible bachelor. If he found it odd that the bride had no family present, he was too polite to mention it. Ethan stood at the altar in a dark suit that must have been specially tailored for his frame, looking impossibly handsome and completely remote. When Natalie took her place beside him, he glanced down at her, and something unreadable flickered across his face. The ceremony was mercifully brief. When the minister instructed Ethan to kiss his bride, there was a moment of awkward hesitation. This had not been discussed in their careful negotiations. Ethan's green eyes met hers, asking a silent question, and she gave the tiniest nod. He bent down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was meant to be perfunctory, she knew, a necessary seal on their business arrangement. But the moment his mouth touched hers, something shifted. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, and the kiss lasted just a heartbeat longer than strictly proper. When he pulled back, his eyes had darkened to the color of a forest at twilight, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. The minister beamed at them, proclaiming them man and wife, and Natalie felt the full weight of what she had just done settle onto her shoulders like a yoke. A small reception followed at the boarding house, where Mrs. Chen had prepared refreshments despite having known the bride for less than a week. Several of Ethan's ranch hands attended, rough men with sunburned faces who regarded Natalie with open curiosity. She smiled and made polite conversation, acutely aware of Ethan standing beside her, his hand occasionally resting at the small of her back in a gesture that felt far too natural for their arrangement. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Ethan loaded her few belongings into his wagon, and they made the journey back to the Double R as husband and wife. The silence between them felt heavier than it had during her first visit, weighted with the reality of what they had done. "I will show you to your rooms," Ethan said when they arrived, his voice carefully neutral. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Torres, has prepared everything. She comes 3 times a week to clean and cook. She knows nothing of our arrangement and believes this to be a normal marriage." "I understand," Natalie replied, following him through the house to the eastern wing. Her quarters proved to be more spacious than she had anticipated. There was a bedroom with a real brass bed frame and a thick quilt, a sitting room with a writing desk and comfortable chairs, and even a small private bathing room. Windows looked out over the ranch toward the distant mountains, and the evening light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "If you need anything, my rooms are at the opposite end of the hall," Ethan said from the doorway. "Mrs. Torres will prepare meals in the main kitchen. We should take breakfast and dinner together when we are both home to maintain appearances." "Of course." Natalie turned to face him, suddenly feeling the full strangeness of the situation. She was married to this man, lived in his house, wore his ring on her finger, and yet he was a complete stranger. "Ethan, I want to thank you for resolving my family's debts so quickly. My mother sent word through her neighbor that she wept with relief." His expression softened slightly. "I keep my agreements, Natalie. You do not need to thank me for that." The sound of her first name in his low voice did something odd to her insides. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and after another moment of weighted silence he withdrew, closing the door quietly behind him. Natalie sank onto the bed, staring at the gold band on her left hand. She was Natalie Rutherford now, at least on paper and in the eyes of the law and the church. The thought should have felt more wrong than it did. The first weeks of their arrangement fell into an awkward routine. Ethan rose before dawn and spent most of his days working the ranch, riding out with his hands to check cattle, mending fences, dealing with the thousands of tasks that kept such an operation running. Natalie tried to make herself useful, helping Mrs. Torres with cooking and cleaning despite the housekeeper's protests that the lady of the house should not do such work. "I am not accustomed to idleness," Natalie explained in her halting Spanish, which made Mrs. Torres smile. They took meals together as Ethan had specified, sitting at opposite ends of the dining table and making stilted conversation about weather and ranch business. He was unfailingly polite, treating her with the same careful courtesy he might show a business associate. She told herself this was exactly what she wanted, that it would make the eventual divorce much simpler. But some rebellious part of her mind kept returning to that single kiss at the altar, the way his eyes had darkened, the warmth of his lips on hers. On the third Sunday of their marriage, Ethan announced they would attend church services in town. "People will expect to see us together," he explained over breakfast, "and it will help establish our presence as a couple before the governor's visit." Natalie nodded, retreating to her room to change into her better dress. When she emerged, Ethan was waiting in the parlor, and his eyes traveled over her in a way that made her breath catch before he quickly looked away. The ride to town was accomplished mostly in silence, but it was a different quality of quiet than before. Natalie found herself sneaking glances at his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands holding the reins. She wondered what he had been like before the war, whether he had always been this self-contained, or if conflict had taught him to lock his feelings away. Church was a revelation. The moment they entered, every eye turned to assess the new Mrs. Rutherford. Women examined her dress, her hair, her face, trying to determine what had captured the heart of the most sought-after bachelor in Silver Peak. Men looked at Ethan with expressions ranging from envy to approval. They sat in a pew near the front, and Ethan's arm came to rest along the back of the seat behind her shoulders. To anyone watching, it would look like an affectionate gesture. Natalie tried to focus on the minister's sermon, but she was acutely aware of Ethan's proximity, the heat of his body next to hers, the faint scent of leather and sage that clung to him. After the service, they were immediately surrounded by well-wishers and the curious. A woman with steel-gray hair and a formidable bosom introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, wife of the mayor. "We are all so delighted that Ethan has finally married," she declared, looking Natalie up and down with sharp eyes. "Though it was quite sudden, was it not?" "You are from Wyoming, I understand." "Yes, madam," Natalie replied, keeping her voice steady. "My family has a ranch there. Ethan and I met through mutual business connections. And it was love at first sight, I suppose." Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she found this highly unlikely. Before Natalie could answer, Ethan's arm moved from the pew back to settle around her waist, drawing her against his side. "How could it be anything else?" he said smoothly, looking down at Natalie with an expression that might have convinced her if she did not know better. "Though I believe I fell in love with her letters before we ever met in person. She writes with such intelligence and wit." They had exchanged no letters, of course, but the lie rolled off his tongue with perfect ease. Mrs. Patterson looked slightly mollified, though still skeptical. The crowd eventually released them, and they made their way back to the wagon. As soon as they were out of immediate sight of the townspeople, Ethan's arm dropped from her waist as if burned, and he put a careful distance between them. "You did well," he said as they started the drive home. "Mrs. Patterson is the worst gossip in 3 counties. If we convinced her, the story will spread." "You are an excellent liar," Natalie observed, not sure if she meant it as a compliment or criticism. His jaw tightened. "I have had practice at telling people what they want to hear." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "The war, among other things." He was silent for a long moment, then added, "I was 17 when I joined up. Thought I was defending my home and my family's honor. By the time I understood what I was really fighting for, it was too late to leave without being shot as a deserter. So yes, I learned to lie. To my commanders, to the enemy, to myself." Natalie felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible." He glanced at her, surprise evident in his eyes. "Most people out here assume anyone who fought for the Confederacy did so out of support for slavery. They do not ask about circumstances or age or the cost of refusing." "I do not believe in judging people for what they did when they were barely more than children," Natalie said quietly. "The world is far too complicated for such simple condemnations." They drove the rest of the way home in contemplative silence, but something had shifted between them. That evening at dinner, their conversation came more easily. Ethan asked about her childhood in Wyoming, and she found herself telling him about learning to ride almost before she could walk, about helping her father during cattle drives, about the endless sky that made you feel both infinitely small and impossibly free. "You miss it," he observed. "Parts of it," she admitted. "But our ranch was struggling even before my father died. The winters were too harsh, and we lost too many head each year to weather and wolves. This land is different, but it has its own kind of beauty." "It does," Ethan agreed. And when his eyes met hers across the table, she felt that strange electricity again, the sense that there were words being spoken beneath the words. The days turned into weeks, and their routine grew more comfortable. Natalie began to understand the rhythms of ranch life, rising early to help Mrs. Torres prepare breakfast, spending her mornings tending a small vegetable garden she had started near the house, reading in the afternoons from Ethan's extensive library. He worked long hours, but sometimes in the evenings he would join her on the porch, and they would sit watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. She learned that he read poetry, which surprised her. He quoted Whitman and Dickinson from memory, his rough voice turning the words into something almost musical. She learned that he had taught himself to read by lamplight after long days of ranch work, that he sent money to support the school in town, that he had once broken his leg trying to save a calf trapped in a ravine, and insisted on splinting it himself rather than ride for a doctor. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher before her father's death had forced her into other responsibilities, that she played piano though she had not touched the keys in years, that she was terrified of spiders but completely unafraid of the largest bulls in his herd. "That makes no rational sense," he said one evening, amusement clear in his voice. "I can predict what a bull will do," she replied primly. "Spiders are chaos incarnate." His laugh was a rare sound, deep and genuine, and it made her smile in response. The governor's visit loomed closer, and Ethan grew more tense, though he tried to hide it. The evening before the scheduled inspection, he found Natalie in the parlor, playing the piano he had uncovered from a dusty cloth at her request. "I did not know we had a piano," she had said in surprise when she first discovered it. "It was here when I bought the property," he had replied. "I never learned to play." Now he stood in the doorway, listening as her fingers moved over the keys in a sonata she had learned as a girl. When she finished, she turned to find him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Thank you." My mother insisted I learn. She said that being able to make music was a gift that could never be taken from you. Ethan moved into the room, coming to stand beside the piano. Natalie, I need to ask something of you. Tomorrow, when the governor visits, he will likely ask personal questions about our marriage and our life together. We need to be convincing. I understand. We should establish our story. She rose from the piano bench, standing to face him. When did we meet? Last winter, he said. You were in Carson City with your father dealing with business affairs. I was there selling cattle. We met at the hotel dining room. And you courted me through letters, she added, remembering his lie to Mrs. Patterson. Yes, when your father died, I wrote offering my condolences. One thing led to another. His eyes searched her face. The governor may ask what attracted me to you, and what will you say? The question came out more breathless than she intended. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a moment against her cheek. I will say that I admired your strength and intelligence. That you did not simper or play coy, that when you spoke, you said things worth hearing. Natalie's heart hammered in her chest. And what should I say attracted me to you? His thumb traced the line of her jaw, his eyes darkening. Whatever you think would be believable. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moments before a summer storm. Natalie knew she should step back, should remind them both that this was an arrangement, a business deal, nothing more. But her body refused to move, and when Ethan's hand slid to cup the back of her neck, drawing her closer, she found herself rising on her toes to meet him. This kiss was nothing like the chaste press of lips at their wedding. This kiss was heat and hunger, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Her hands came up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, and a sound somewhere between a gasp and a moan escaped her throat. Ethan made a low, rumbling noise in response, his free arm banding around her waist to pull her fully against him. She could feel every hard plane of his body, the thundering of his heart matching her own, the barely leashed control in his touch. When his tongue traced the seam of her lips, she opened for him without thought, lost in sensation and the rightness of being held like this, wanted like this. It was Ethan who finally pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead resting against hers. That was not part of our agreement, he said roughly. No, she whispered. It was not. I should apologize. Should you? Her hands were still gripping his shoulders and she made no move to let go. His eyes opened, meeting hers at close range. What she saw there made her breath catch. Want, yes, but also confusion and something that might have been fear. This complicates things. Only if we let it. She was not sure where the words came from, only that they felt true. Natalie, you need to understand. I told you this was a business arrangement because I do not do complications. I do not do messy emotions or entanglements. I learned a long time ago that caring for people, needing them, only leads to loss and pain. She should have felt hurt by the words, but instead she heard the old wounds beneath them. What happened to you, Ethan? His arms dropped from around her and he stepped back, his expression closing like shutters over a window. Nothing that matters now. I will see you at breakfast. The governor arrives at 10. He left the room before she could respond, and Natalie sank back onto the piano bench, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her mind whirling. Whatever this thing growing between them was, it terrified him, and if she were honest with herself, it terrified her too. She had agreed to this arrangement specifically because it was supposed to be simple, straightforward, uncomplicated by emotion. But somewhere between that first handshake and now, something had changed. Something had taken root and begun to grow despite the barren soil they had planted it in. Sleep came late that night, and when she finally drifted off, her dreams were full of green eyes and calloused hands and the taste of a kiss that was not supposed to mean anything. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Natalie dressed carefully in her green dress, pinning her hair up in a style that was elegant but not fussy. When she entered the dining room, Ethan was already there, looking disturbingly handsome in a pressed white shirt and dark trousers. His eyes met hers briefly before sliding away, and the careful distance in his expression made her chest ache. "Good morning," she said quietly, taking her seat. "Morning." He poured her coffee without being asked, a gesture that had become routine over the weeks. "The governor will likely stay for lunch. Mrs. Torres has prepared enough food to feed a small army." They ate in uncomfortable silence, the ease of the previous weeks shattered by last night's kiss and Ethan's subsequent withdrawal. Natalie wanted to shake him, to demand he stop running from whatever this was between them, but she had no right to make such demands. He had been clear about the terms of their arrangement from the beginning. She was the one changing the rules. Governor Martin arrived promptly at 10, accompanied by 2 territorial officials and the county land surveyor. He was a portly man in his 50s with mutton-chop whiskers and shrewd eyes that took in everything. Ethan greeted them on the porch, and Natalie stood at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm in what she hoped looked like wifely affection rather than the desperate anchor it felt like. "Governor Martin, it is an honor," Ethan said, shaking the man's hand. "May I present my wife, Natalie?" "Mrs. Rutherford." The governor took her hand with a small bow. "I must say, Ethan, when I received word that you had married, I was quite surprised. You had always seemed so determinedly single." Ethan's arm moved to wrap around Natalie's waist, and she felt him draw her close. "That was before I met Natalie. Some things are worth changing your plans for." The governor's eyes twinkled. "Indeed. How long have you been married, my dear?" "Nearly 6 weeks now," Natalie replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite Ethan's proximity and the memory of his kiss burning in her mind. "Though it feels both longer and shorter, if that makes sense." "The honeymoon period," Governor Martin said with a knowing nod. "Treasure it." "Now, Ethan, shall we discuss this water rights business?" The men retreated to Ethan's study, and Natalie was left to wait anxiously in the parlor. Through the closed door she could hear the rumble of voices but could not make out specific words. An hour passed, then 2. She tried to read but could not focus, her mind spinning with worry. Everything depended on this meeting, Ethan's entire plan, the future of the ranch, her own financial security. Finally, the study door opened, and the men emerged looking serious but not angry. Governor Martin caught sight of Natalie and smiled. "Mrs. Rutherford, I hope you will join us for lunch. I find I am quite famished after all that business talk." The meal was an elaborate affair, with Mrs. Torres outdoing herself. Conversation flowed around topics both serious and trivial, politics and weather and the state of the territory's development. The governor seemed genuinely interested in Natalie's opinions, asking about her impressions of Nevada compared to Wyoming, her thoughts on the school system, her plans for the ranch. "I hope you understand the importance of strong family foundations out here," Governor Martin said at one point, looking between Natalie and Ethan. "This territory is growing rapidly, but we need settlers with roots, people who will build communities and raise the next generation with good values." "I could not agree more," Ethan replied smoothly. "It is why I wanted to establish a proper home before pursuing these water rights. A man alone is just passing through. A man with a wife and plans for a family is invested in the future." The words were part of their performance, Natalie knew, but they still made something twist in her chest. Plans for a family. children that would never exist because their marriage was a temporary fiction. After lunch, Governor Martin insisted on touring the property. They walked through the outbuildings, inspected the cattle, rode out to see the creek that Ethan hoped to secure rights to for irrigation and grazing. The governor asked pointed questions about water flow, seasonal variation, and impact on neighboring properties. Ethan answered each one with impressive knowledge and careful preparation. As they stood beside the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones, Governor Martin turned to Natalie. "What do you think of all this, Mrs. Rutherford? Will you be content living so far from town, so isolated from other women's company?" Natalie looked at the water, at the mountains in the distance, at the vast sky overhead. "I was raised on a ranch, Governor. I understand the work and the solitude. But I also understand the reward of building something lasting. Ethan has created something remarkable here, and I am honored to be part of its future." Something in her voice must have rung true because the governor nodded approvingly. When he glanced at Ethan, she saw respect in his eyes. By the time the officials departed in the late afternoon, Natalie felt wrung out from the constant performance. Ethan stood beside her on the porch, watching the dust cloud from their wagon fade into the distance. When they were finally alone, his arm dropped from her waist and he stepped away, putting that careful distance between them again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You were perfect, exactly what he needed to see." The words should have pleased her, but instead they stung. "I am glad I could fulfill my part of our business arrangement." He flinched slightly at her tone. "Natalie, will he approve the water rights?" she interrupted, not wanting to hear whatever carefully distant thing he was about to say. "I think so." He seemed satisfied. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned meant he was unsettled. "He will send his decision within 2 weeks. Good. Then I suppose we just have to maintain the charade a bit longer." She turned to go back into the house, needing space and air and somewhere to nurse the hurt blooming in her chest. "Natalie, wait." His hand caught her arm, gentle but firm. "Last night I should not have kissed you. It was wrong of me to blur the lines of our agreement." She turned to face him, anger rising to replace the hurt. "You kissed me at our wedding too. Was that also wrong?" "That was necessary for appearances." And last night, his jaw worked, his green eyes turbulent. "Last night was a mistake." The word landed like a slap. Natalie pulled her arm from his grip. "I see. Then let me assure you, Mr. Rutherford, that I will not make the mistake of forgetting the purely business nature of our arrangement again." She left him standing on the porch and retreated to her rooms, closing the door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow the tears to come, hot and frustrated and furious. She was angry at him for kissing her and then calling it a mistake. She was angry at herself for caring, for letting her feelings grow into something dangerous and complicated. Most of all, she was angry at the situation, at the fact that their marriage was built on pretense and would end in dissolution, regardless of what her foolish heart might want. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. Ethan seemed to go out of his way to avoid her, taking his meals early or late, spending even longer hours out on the range. When they did encounter each other, he was painfully polite and utterly distant. Natalie threw herself into work, expanding her garden, helping Mrs. Torres with preserving food for winter, riding out to sketch the landscape in a journal she had purchased in town. The housekeeper watched them both with knowing eyes but said nothing. One afternoon, as Natalie was helping shell peas, Mrs. Torres finally spoke. "My husband and I, we fought terribly in our first year of marriage," she said in Spanish, which Natalie was learning to understand better. "He thought I was too headstrong. I thought he was too cold. We almost separated." "What changed?" Natalie asked quietly. I learned that his coldness was fear. He had lost his first wife and baby in childbirth, you see. He was afraid to love again, afraid to lose again. And he learned that my stubbornness was strength, that I would not break under hardship. Mrs. Torres gave her a meaningful look. Sometimes men protect themselves by pretending not to feel, but pretending and truth are not the same thing. Before Natalie could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Both women hurried to the window to see a rider galloping up to the house. Ethan emerged from the barn, and the rider handed him an official-looking envelope. Even from a distance, Natalie could see Ethan's hands shake slightly as he opened it. His head came up, and his eyes found the house, found her watching from the window. Even across the distance, she could see the expression on his face. Relief, triumph, and something else she could not quite name. He strode toward the house with purpose, bursting through the door and into the kitchen. "We got it," he said, slightly breathless. The governor approved the water rights, full access to the creek for irrigation and grazing with priority over any future claims. Mrs. Torres clapped her hands together in delight, speaking rapid Spanish congratulations. But Ethan's eyes were on Natalie, searching her face. "That is wonderful news," she managed to say. "I am happy for you, for the ranch, for us," he corrected, then seemed to catch himself. "For the success of the arrangement, right. The arrangement, the business deal that was now apparently complete." "So the hard part is done," Natalie said, proud of how steady her voice remained. "You have what you needed." Something flickered in his eyes, pain or regret or frustration. "Yes, though we should still maintain appearances for a time. The governor will expect to see us together at social functions, and we do not want to raise suspicions. Of course, appearances." She turned back to the peas, her vision blurring slightly. "If you will excuse me, I should finish helping Mrs. Torres." She heard him leave, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Mrs. Torres made a sympathetic noise and patted her shoulder but said nothing more. That evening, Ethan knocked on the door of her sitting room. She almost did not answer, but curiosity won out. He stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. "May I come in?" She stepped back, allowing him entry. He prowled the small space like a caged animal, clearly working up to something. "I have been thinking," he finally said, "about our arrangement. About the next year and a half before the agreed-upon divorce." Natalie's stomach clenched. "What about it? It seems foolish for us to live as strangers under the same roof. We should try to at least maintain a cordial friendship." "Cordial friendship," she repeated flatly. "Is that what you call what happened between us?" His jaw tightened. "What happened between us was a complication neither of us can afford." "Why?" The word burst out before she could stop it. "Why is it such a terrible complication, Ethan? We are married, truly legally married. Would it be so awful if there were actual feelings involved?" "Yes." The word was harsh, uncompromising. "Because feelings end, Natalie. People leave or die or betray you. Every single person I have ever cared about has been taken from me. My parents died of fever when I was 16. My older brother was killed at Shiloh, blown apart by artillery while I watched. My best friend took a bullet meant for me at Chickamauga and died in my arms. I learned that lesson thoroughly. Caring for people, needing them, only brings pain." His voice had risen, raw emotion cracking through his careful control. Natalie felt tears sting her eyes, not for herself but for him, for the boy who had learned such terrible lessons. "So your solution is to never care for anyone again?" she asked quietly. "To live your entire life alone and isolated, even when someone is right here wanting to care for you?" "It is safer," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Safer is not the same as better. Safer is not the same as happy." She took a step toward him, then another. "I did not want to feel this way about you, Ethan. I agreed to this arrangement specifically because it was supposed to be simple and temporary. But somewhere between the wedding and now, something changed. You changed it when you quoted poetry to me. When you laughed at my irrational fear of spiders. When you kissed me like I was something precious. I should not have done those things. But he did not move away when she closed the distance between them. Maybe not, but you did, and you cannot take them back. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. I am not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to abandon all your careful defenses. I am just asking you to consider that maybe, possibly, this thing between us could be real if we let it. His hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his heart. What if I cannot? What if I am too broken to be what you deserve? Then we will figure it out together. She looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her eyes. But you have to actually try, Ethan. You have to stop running from every genuine feeling you have. For a long moment, they stood frozen, his hand over hers, their eyes locked. She could see the war playing out in his expression, fear battling with want, old wounds arguing with new possibilities. Then, slowly, he bent his head and kissed her. It was different from the passionate kiss in the parlor, gentler, but somehow more devastating. This kiss tasted like surrender, like the crumbling of walls built over years of carefully cultivated isolation. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her free hand sliding up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I do not know how to do this, he admitted, his voice rough. I do not know how to let someone in. Then we will learn together, she whispered, one day at a time. He pulled back enough to look at her, really look at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart soar. Fear was still there, yes, but also hope and tenderness, and the fragile beginning of trust. One day at a time, he repeated, and then he kissed her again. The following weeks brought a shift in the atmosphere of the Double R. Ethan still maintained his own quarters, still went out to work the ranch each day, but the walls between them had begun to crack. He started joining her for breakfast each morning, their conversation no longer stilted but easy and ranging over any topic that caught their fancy. He asked her opinion on ranch business and actually listened to her suggestions. She taught him to play simple melodies on the piano, laughing when his large, calloused fingers fumbled over the keys. One evening, she found him in the parlor, staring at a small daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, she thought he might hide it away. Instead, he held it out to her. My brother Thomas, he said quietly. This was taken right before he enlisted. The young man in the photograph looked so much like Ethan that it made her throat tighten. Same dark hair, same strong jaw, but with a carefree smile that she had never seen on Ethan's face. He looks like he was full of life, she said softly. He was. He wanted to be a lawyer, had dreams of going to university once the war was over. Ethan took the photograph back, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. He was only 22 when he died. I had just turned 19. I held him while he bled out, and there was nothing I could do, nothing but watch him slip away. Natalie moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his free hand in both of hers. I am so sorry. After Thomas died, I stopped writing to my parents. I could not bear to put words to what I had witnessed. By the time the war ended and I made it home, they had been dead for a year. Fever swept through their town, and I was not there. His voice cracked. Everyone I loved gone, and I survived. Survivor's guilt, Natalie said gently. My father struggled with it after his brother drowned trying to save cattle during a spring flood. He always wondered why he had been the one to live. How did he bear it? He told me once that the only way to honor the dead was to live well, to love fiercely and build something meaningful. That wasting the life they gave up theirs for was the real tragedy. Ethan was silent for a long moment, still staring at his brother's image. "I am not sure I know how to do that anymore." "Then let me help you remember," she said, squeezing his hand. He set the photograph aside carefully and turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. "You are extraordinary, Natalie Rutherford. You know that?" Her heart stuttered at the intensity in his gaze. "I am just me. Just you is more than I deserve." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a kiss that spoke of gratitude and growing affection and the terrifying possibility of something deeper. As summer deepened into the intense heat of July, their relationship continued to shift and evolve. Ethan began teaching her the intricacies of running a large cattle operation, taking her with him when he rode out to check the herds. She proved to be a capable rider and quick learner, able to spot a sick animal or potential trouble with the ease of someone raised on a ranch. "You are a natural at this," he said one afternoon as they watched his men move cattle to a new pasture near the creek, taking advantage of the newly secured water rights. "I grew up doing this," she reminded him. "Though I admit, your operation is considerably more sophisticated than my father's was." "That is because I read everything I could get my hands on about modern ranching techniques," Ethan said. "Journals from Scotland about selective breeding, articles from Argentina about grazing rotation. Knowledge is the difference between survival and success out here." She smiled at the passion in his voice. "You really love this life, do not you?" "I do. The land does not lie or betray. Cattle do not have hidden agendas. There is something pure about the work, about building something with your own hands and watching it grow. And now you can grow even more with the water rights secured." "We can grow more," he corrected, his eyes finding hers. "This is as much yours as mine now, Natalie. For as long as you are here." The reminder of their arrangement's temporary nature cast a shadow over the moment. She had been trying not to think about the ticking clock, about the divorce that was supposed to happen in another year and a half. Everything felt too real now, too precious to imagine walking away from. That night, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing spectacular lightning and crashing thunder. Natalie woke to find her room illuminated by brilliant flashes, the windows rattling with each boom of thunder. She had never been frightened of storms, but something about this one felt different, more violent and untamed. A particularly loud crash made her jump, and she decided to check that the windows were properly secured. As she moved through her sitting room, she heard a knock at her door. Ethan stood in the hallway, his hair mussed from sleep, wearing only trousers and a hastily donned shirt. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. This storm is more severe than usual." "I am fine," she assured him, even as another flash of lightning illuminated them both in stark white light, followed immediately by thunder that shook the house. "That was close," Ethan said, frowning. "Too close. I should check the barn and make sure the horses are not panicking." "I will come with you." "Natalie, you do not have to do that. The storm is dangerous." "Which is exactly why you should not go alone," she said firmly, already moving to pull on her boots and a shawl over her nightgown. They made their way through the lashing rain to the barn, running the last few yards as lightning split the sky overhead. Inside, the horses were indeed restless, stamping and whinnying nervously. Ethan moved from stall to stall, speaking in low, soothing tones, checking that each animal was secure. Natalie helped calm a particularly agitated mare, stroking her neck and murmuring reassurances. When the storm's fury finally began to ease, she looked up to find Ethan watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. He crossed the space between them slowly, his wet shirt clinging to his shoulders, his hair plastered to his forehead. "I was just thinking that I am very glad you are here, that you are you." Her heart pounded harder than the diminishing thunder. "Ethan, I know I have been difficult. I know I pushed you away and called our kiss a mistake, but I need you to know that it was not. None of this is." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "You have become so important to me, Natalie, so necessary, and that terrifies me." "It terrifies me too," she admitted. "But I would rather be terrified together than safe and alone." "When did you get so brave?" he asked, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "When I agreed to marry a stubborn cowboy who thinks walls around his heart will keep him safe from pain." He huffed out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Those walls are not working very well anymore." "Good." She rose on her toes, her hands sliding up his chest. "Let them fall, Ethan. Let me in completely." His kiss was her answer, fierce and claiming and full of all the things he could not yet say aloud. She kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring every ounce of her own growing feelings into the contact. The storm outside had passed, but the one between them was just beginning to build. When they finally broke apart, Ethan pressed his forehead to hers, his breathing ragged. "Come back to the house with me, not to your wing, to mine." It was an invitation and a question, loaded with meaning. Natalie knew what he was asking, knew that accepting would change everything between them irrevocably. Their arrangement had already become something more, but this would seal it, would make it undeniable. "Yes," she whispered, and watched relief and desire flare in his eyes. They ran through the rain back to the house, laughing breathlessly, and when he drew her into his rooms, into his bed, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He made love to her with a combination of tenderness and passion that left her shaking, whispering her name like a prayer, touching her like she was something infinitely precious. Afterwards, she lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and felt more at home than she ever had in her entire life. "Stay with me," he murmured into her hair. "Not just tonight, always." "Always is a long time," she said softly, tracing patterns on his chest. "Not long enough." His arms tightened around her. "I know we have an agreement. I know I promised you an out after 2 years, but I do not want that, Natalie. I do not want you to leave. I want this to be real." She pushed up on her elbow to look at him. "It is already real, Ethan. It has been for weeks now." "Then marry me," he said. "Really marry me, not as a business arrangement but as a true partnership. I love you, Natalie. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into my house with that determined look on your face, trying so hard to be brave. I just did not want to admit it, even to myself." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too, so much it scares me." "Then we will be scared together," he said, echoing her earlier words. "What do you say? Will you really be my wife?" "I already am your wife," she pointed out, laughing through her tears. "You know what I mean. Will you stay? Will you build this life with me, not out of obligation or financial necessity, but because you want to?" She kissed him, putting all her answer into the contact. When she pulled back, she smiled. "Yes. Yes to all of it." His grin was like sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. He kissed her again, and they spent the rest of the night proving to each other with hands and lips and whispered words just how real their marriage had become. The next morning, Natalie woke wrapped in Ethan's arms, sunlight streaming through the unfamiliar windows of his bedroom. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, wife," he said, his voice rough with sleep and satisfaction. "Good morning, husband," she replied, testing the word without the weight of pretense behind it. They spent a lazy hour in bed, talking and laughing and making love again with the sunlight warm on their skin. When they finally dressed and emerged for breakfast, Mrs. Torres took one look at their joined hands and radiant faces and smiled knowingly. "About time," she muttered in Spanish, bustling to prepare an enormous breakfast. Over the following weeks, everything shifted. Natalie moved her belongings into Ethan's rooms, and they made the space theirs together. He cleared space on his bookshelves for her journals and sketches. She added curtains and cushions that softened the austere masculine decor. They fell into new routines, waking tangled together each morning, working side by side during the day, spending evenings on the porch or in bed, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal dedication. News of their obvious happiness spread through Silver Peak, and the last whispers of suspicion about their sudden marriage faded. They attended church together, sat pressed close with Ethan's hand covering hers, and the affection between them was clear for anyone to see. One Sunday after services, Mrs. Patterson cornered Natalie with a shrewd look. "You know, Mrs. Rutherford, when you first arrived, I had my doubts about such a hasty marriage. But seeing you both now, I can admit when I am wrong. You two are clearly quite devoted to each other." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Natalie said sincerely. "Ethan is a good man, he is indeed, and you are good for him. He is softer now, more open. Love has that effect when it is genuine." Natalie smiled, thinking of Ethan waiting by the wagon, his green eyes finding hers across the churchyard with that particular warmth that never failed to make her pulse race. "It is very genuine, I assure you." As summer faded into autumn, the ranch flourished. The secured water rights allowed Ethan to expand his operation, buying more cattle and hiring additional hands. Natalie proved invaluable in managing the books and correspondence, freeing Ethan to focus on the physical work he loved. They made decisions together, argued occasionally about the best approach to various problems, and always resolved their disputes in bed, wrapped in each other's arms. In October, Natalie missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but when a second month passed, she could no longer deny the possibility. Mrs. Torres noticed her turning green at the smell of coffee one morning and gave her a knowing look. "How far along?" the housekeeper asked gently. 2 months, I think, maybe closer to 3. Natalie pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "I have not told Ethan yet. I wanted to be certain." "You are certain," Mrs. Torres said with the confidence of a woman who had raised 5 children of her own. "And you should tell him soon." Men do not like to be kept in the dark about such things. That evening, Natalie found Ethan in the barn, brushing down his horse after a long day. She leaned against the stall door, watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt, gathering her courage. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He looked up immediately, catching something in her tone. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant." The brush fell from his hand, clattering to the floor. He stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, disbelief, and then a joy so profound it made her eyes sting with tears. "Pregnant," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You are carrying our child." "I am. Are you happy about it? I know we did not plan for this, at least not so soon." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. "Happy, Natalie, I am overjoyed. Terrified but overjoyed," she laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Terrified is reasonable. I am somewhat terrified myself." He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile, and placed his large hand over her stomach. "A baby, our baby. When? Late spring, I think, maybe early summer. A summer baby." His eyes were suspiciously bright. "We will need to prepare a nursery and hire help for you." You should not be doing heavy work anymore. Ethan, I am pregnant, not incapacitated. Women have been having babies and working ranches for generations. Not my wife, he said firmly. Not the mother of my child. I will not risk you or the baby. They argued about it good-naturedly for weeks, with Natalie insisting she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities, and Ethan hovering like a nervous hen. Mrs. Torres found the whole thing highly amusing. As Natalie's belly began to swell with their child, Ethan became even more protective and affectionate. He would place his hand on her stomach every evening, talking to the baby in a low voice, telling stories about the ranch and the land and the life they would have together. He read medical texts about pregnancy and childbirth until Natalie had to take the books away because he was making himself anxious. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, she reminded him gently. I am strong and healthy. Everything will be fine. I cannot lose you, he said quietly one night, his hand spread possessively over her rounded belly. I have lost everyone I ever loved. I cannot bear the thought of losing you too. She took his face in her hands, making him meet her eyes. You are not going to lose me. I am not going anywhere. We are going to have this baby, raise them together, and grow old arguing about ranch management and whose turn it is to milk the cows. We do not have cows, he pointed out. Then we will argue about something else. She kissed him softly. I promise you, Ethan Rutherford, I am not leaving. Not now. Not ever. Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that turned the landscape into something magical. Natalie spent more time indoors as her pregnancy advanced, sewing tiny clothes and preparing the nursery they had set up in a sunny room near their bedroom. Ethan insisted on hiring a woman from town to come help with household tasks, and Mrs. Torres fussed over Natalie's diet constantly. In late February, they received a letter from Natalie's mother. Her health had improved dramatically with the lifting of financial burdens, and she wrote that she hoped to visit in the spring to meet her new son-in-law and welcome her first grandchild. Natalie cried happy tears over the letter, and Ethan held her close, understanding without words how much this meant to her. We should tell her the truth, Natalie said quietly, about how our marriage really started. Ethan considered this. If you think she should know. I do not want lies between us and our family, even lies of omission. She looked up at him. The arrangement does not matter anymore. What matters is where we are now. Then we will tell her, he agreed, and let her see how very real this has become. As spring arrived and Natalie's due date approached, Ethan became nearly unbearable in his hovering. He refused to let her go more than a few feet from the house, insisted she rest constantly, and panicked at every small discomfort. The doctor had to be summoned from town twice for what turned out to be false labor, and even Mrs. Torres was beginning to lose patience with him. Mr. Rutherford, she said firmly after the second false alarm, you must calm yourself. Your wife needs you to be strong, not a nervous wreck. I am trying, Ethan muttered, running his hands through his hair. But what if something goes wrong? What if I cannot protect her? You cannot protect anyone from life, Mrs. Torres said gently. You can only love them through it, and that you do very well. On a warm morning in late May, Natalie woke to cramping that felt different from the previous false starts. She lay still for a moment, timing the sensations, and then nudged Ethan awake. It is time, she said calmly. The baby is coming. Ethan bolted upright, suddenly wide awake. Now. Are you certain? Should I get the doctor? Should I boil water? What do I do? Despite the growing discomfort, Natalie laughed. Send someone to town for the doctor and the midwife. Then come back and breathe with me. That is all you need to do. The next 12 hours were the longest of Ethan's life. He paced outside the bedroom door while the doctor and midwife attended Natalie, occasionally allowed in to hold her hand and wipe her brow. She was so brave, so strong, laboring through the contractions with gritted teeth and fierce determination. Every cry of pain felt like a knife in his heart, and he wished desperately that he could take the burden from her. As the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, Natalie gave one final, tremendous push, and the thin wail of a newborn filled the air. Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. A big, healthy boy. They placed the baby on Natalie's chest, and Ethan moved to sit beside her on the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny person they had created. His son had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in indignation at being thrust into the cold world. "He is perfect," Natalie whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Ethan, look at what we made. I am looking." His voice was rough with emotion, his own eyes wet. "You are amazing, so strong. I am in awe of you." The baby quieted, turning his head toward Natalie's voice, and when his eyes opened briefly, Ethan saw they were the same startling green as his own. "We should name him," Natalie said softly, stroking the baby's soft cheek. "What do you think of Thomas? After your brother?" Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, all the old grief and love pouring out. "Thomas," he repeated. "Yes, Thomas Graham Rutherford. It is perfect." Over the next few weeks, they settled into the exhausting, wonderful rhythm of new parenthood. Thomas was a good baby, though he had a powerful set of lungs when hungry or wet. Ethan proved surprisingly adept at soothing him, walking the floor at night with the infant against his shoulder, singing old songs in his rough voice. Natalie would wake to find them together, the tiny baby sleeping peacefully on Ethan's broad chest, both of them snoring softly, and her heart would feel so full she thought it might burst. Her mother arrived in June, finally well enough to travel. She was a small, delicate woman with Natalie's hazel eyes, and she wept when she first held her grandson. That evening, sitting on the porch while baby Thomas slept in his cradle, Natalie and Ethan told her the truth about how their marriage had begun. Martha Graham listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she looked between them for a long moment. "So you married my daughter as a business arrangement," she said to Ethan. "Yes, madam." He met her gaze steadily. "I needed a wife for practical reasons, and Natalie needed financial security. It was meant to be temporary. And now I love her more than I knew it was possible to love another person," he said simply. "Now I wake up grateful every single day that she agreed to this arrangement, because it brought her into my life. I would go through anything, endure anything, to keep her and our son safe and happy." Martha turned to her daughter. "And you, Natalie, are you happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Natalie replied honestly. "It started as business, yes, but it became something real very quickly. Ethan is everything I could want in a husband and partner." Martha smiled, her eyes softening. "Then I suppose I should thank Mr. Henderson for his unusual matchmaking, should I not? Sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we need to be." She stayed for a month, doting on her grandson and getting to know her son-in-law. By the time she left to return to Wyoming, she had given them her full blessing and made Ethan promise to bring Natalie and Thomas to visit soon. As summer deepened, life on the Double R continued to grow and flourish. The cattle operation expanded with the secured water rights, and Ethan hired more hands to manage the increased herd. Natalie balanced motherhood with helping run the ranch, proving that it was entirely possible to do both despite Ethan's earlier worries. Thomas grew rapidly, becoming a happy, curious baby who loved being carried around the ranch to see the horses and cattle. Ethan was a devoted father, teaching his son about the land from his earliest days, pointing out birds and plants and promising all the adventures they would have together. On a warm evening in late August, they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Thomas played with wooden blocks on a blanket. Natalie leaned against Ethan's side, his arm around her shoulders, feeling completely content. "You ever think about how things might have been different?" she asked quietly. "If we had not made that arrangement." "Sometimes," he admitted. "Though mostly I just feel grateful that we did. I was so alone before you came, Natalie. I had built my walls so high and strong that I could not see over them anymore. You broke through all of that." "We broke through together," she corrected. "You had to choose to let me in. Best choice I ever made." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Besides agreeing to marry you in the first place." "I thought you said it was a business decision," she teased. "Worst business decision ever," he countered. "I was supposed to get a wife in name only. Instead, I got someone who argues with me about cattle breeding, plays piano at odd hours, is completely unafraid of the biggest bull in my herd, and has utterly stolen my heart." "You are getting quite romantic in your old age, Mr. Rutherford." "I have a good teacher," he said, turning to kiss her properly. Thomas made a happy gurgling sound as if approving of his parents' affection. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Natalie thought about the desperate woman who had stepped off the stage in Silver Peak over a year ago, clutching a lawyer's telegram and a plan that could save her family. She had expected a cold business arrangement, a temporary fix to an impossible situation. She had never imagined finding love, building a real marriage, creating a family. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, his voice soft in the gathering dusk. "I am thinking that I am very glad I said yes to your proposal," she replied, "even though it was the most unconventional arrangement imaginable." "The town certainly thought we were crazy," he agreed, "getting married so fast, barely knowing each other. And now they see what I see. A strong, beautiful woman who is the heart of this ranch and the love of my life." She smiled up at him. "You know what is funny? We told everyone it was a business deal. We maintained the pretense so carefully." "Until I kissed you," he said, his eyes warm with memory. "Until you kissed me and forgot the pretense entirely," she agreed. "I think that was the moment everything changed, when you stopped pretending and let yourself feel." "Best moment of my life," he said. "Well, tied with the day Thomas was born and the day you agreed to make this marriage real." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one over the Nevada mountains. Thomas had fallen asleep on his blanket, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to hard work and careful stewardship. "I have been thinking," Natalie said eventually, "about expanding the house, adding more bedrooms." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Planning for more children already, maybe. Would you object to that?" His hand moved to rest on her stomach in a gesture that had become familiar. "I would very much like more children with you, a whole houseful if you are willing." "Let us start with one more and see how we manage," she suggested, laughing. "Thomas is barely 3 months old." "Fair enough." He pulled her closer. "Though I do enjoy the practice." "Ethan Rutherford." She swatted his arm, even as heat rose in her cheeks. He grinned, unrepentant. "What? I am just saying that if we are going to have more children, we should be very diligent about our efforts." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. This was the man she had married, who could quote poetry and make her laugh, who loved her with a fierce devotion that still took her breath away. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden glow of cottonwood leaves, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. Ethan's joy was tempered only slightly by his immediate return to hovering, though this time she was better prepared to manage his anxious nature. "I survived the first pregnancy beautifully," she reminded him when he tried to insist she rest more. "There is no reason to think this one will be any different. Humor me," he said, his hand protective on her barely there bump. "I like taking care of you. You take care of me constantly," she pointed out. "You built me that expanded garden space. You bought me every book I mention wanting. You bring me flowers from the hills for no reason at all. Because I love you," he said simply. "And I never want you to doubt that, not for a single moment." Their second child, a daughter with Natalie's hazel eyes and honey-colored hair, was born the following June in a much easier labor than the first. They named her Caroline Martha, after both grandmothers, and Ethan proved just as devoted a father to his daughter as he was to his son. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle with eager enthusiasm. Caroline proved to have her mother's determination and her father's stubborn streak, a combination that made for a strong-willed child who kept them on their toes. 2 more children followed, a son named William and another daughter named Sarah, until the ranch house rang with the sounds of family life, of laughter and occasional tears, of bedtime stories and morning chaos. Ethan proved to be an exceptional father, patient and loving, teaching his children about the land and animals with the same care he had once used to teach Natalie. She would often find him in the barn with all 4 children clustered around him, listening intently as he explained some aspect of ranch management or told stories about the old days. The Double R continued to prosper under their joint stewardship. They expanded the cattle operation, bought additional land, and became one of the most successful ranches in Nevada. But more than the financial success, they built a legacy of love and family, creating exactly the kind of home that neither of them had dared to dream of when they first entered their business arrangement. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Natalie riding out to the creek where they had stood with the governor all those years ago. The children were with Mrs. Torres, who still worked for them despite being well into her 60s, giving them a rare afternoon alone. They dismounted near the water and Ethan pulled a small package from his saddlebag. "What is this?" Natalie asked, surprised. "Open it and see." Inside was a simple gold locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found 2 tiny photographs, one of each of them from their wedding day, impossibly young and trying so hard to hide their feelings. "I found these in Henderson's files," Ethan explained. "The photographer took them that day, but we never saw the results. I thought you might want them." Natalie stared at the images, remembering that afternoon so clearly. The nervous woman in the cream dress had no idea what was coming, how completely her life was about to change in the best possible way. "We look so serious," she said softly. "We were terrified," he agreed. "I was convinced I was making a terrible mistake, that letting someone into my life would only end in pain. And now," he took the locket from her hands and fastened it around her neck, then turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Now I know that the only mistake would have been pushing you away. You and our children are my whole world, Natalie. Every good thing in my life stems from the day you stepped off that stage with nothing but courage and desperation. I love you," she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "So much more than I knew was possible. I love you too." He kissed her gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stubborn cowboy with too many walls around his heart." "Thank you for learning to let them down," she replied, "for choosing to love me even when you were afraid." They stood by the creek for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, thinking about the strange path that had brought them together and the beautiful life they had built from such unlikely beginnings. As the sun began to set, they rode back to the ranch house, where their children waited with a celebration dinner that Mrs. Torres had helped them prepare. The table was chaotic and loud, with 4 children all talking over each other, trying to tell their parents about their day. Ethan caught Natalie's eye across the noise and smiled, and she smiled back, understanding perfectly. This was what they had built together. Not just a successful ranch or financial security, but a family, a home, a love that had started as pretense and become more real than anything either of them had ever known. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Natalie and Ethan sat on their porch as they had so many evenings before. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and infinite, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "The arrangement, the way we started." Natalie considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Because if we had met any other way, we might not have given each other a chance. You would have been too guarded. I would have been too proud. The arrangement forced us together long enough to see past our defenses." "Henderson should go into matchmaking," Ethan said wryly. "He has quite the talent for it." "He does indeed." Natalie leaned into her husband's side, feeling his arm come around her automatically, though I doubt many business arrangements end quite like ours did. "Probably not," he agreed. "We are rather exceptional." She laughed softly. "Is that what we are, among other things?" His voice turned serious. "You know what the best part is? We still have years and years ahead of us, watching our children grow up, maybe meeting grandchildren someday, growing old together." "That sounds perfect," Natalie said. "Though you will probably still be hovering over me when we are both gray and creaky." "Absolutely," he confirmed without shame. "I intend to hover for the rest of our lives. You will just have to learn to live with it. I think I can manage that." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "After all, I have had plenty of practice already." They sat together under the stars, talking and dreaming about the future, secure in the love they had found and built together. The business arrangement that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something infinitely more valuable and real. They had started as strangers bound by necessity and law, but they had become partners, lovers, best friends, and the foundation of each other's world. And if anyone in Silver Peak still remembered the hasty marriage that had once raised eyebrows, they only spoke of it with approval now. The Rutherfords were a love story. Everyone agreed, proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. Years continued to pass in their quiet corner of Nevada. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who took after his father in his love of the land and cattle, already talking about expanding the operation when he was old enough to take it over. Caroline proved to have a head for business that rivaled her mother's, keeping meticulous records and suggesting innovative solutions to ranch problems. William had a gentle way with horses that made him invaluable in training the new stock. Sarah, the youngest, had inherited both her father's stubbornness and her mother's determination, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. Natalie and Ethan watched their children grow with pride and occasional exasperation, marveling at how quickly time passed when your days were full of purpose and love. They added rooms to the house as needed, built a larger barn, planted trees that would someday provide shade for grandchildren they hoped to meet. Martha Graham eventually moved to Nevada permanently, unable to bear being so far from her daughter and grandchildren. She lived in a small house on the ranch property that Ethan built for her, spending her days doting on her grandchildren and helping Natalie with the endless tasks of running a large household. "You know," she said to Natalie one afternoon as they shelled peas together while watching the children play in the yard. "When you sent that telegram saying you were getting married, I was so worried. It seemed so sudden, so unlike you." "I was desperate," Natalie admitted, "and terrified, but also strangely hopeful." "You chose well," Martha said, her eyes on Ethan, who was teaching William how to properly saddle a horse. "He is a good man and a good father, better than I could have hoped for you." "He is," Natalie agreed, warmth flooding her chest as she watched her husband with their son. "Though he would be the first to tell you that he did not think he could be either of those things before we met." "Love has a way of bringing out the best in people," Martha observed, "when they are brave enough to let it." As their 20th anniversary approached, the children conspired with Mrs. Torres to plan a surprise celebration. They invited everyone from miles around, transforming the ranch into a festival ground with lanterns strung between trees and tables laden with food. When Natalie and Ethan returned from what they thought was a simple ride to check on distant cattle, they found their home filled with friends, neighbors, and well-wishers. "Surprise!" the children shouted in unison, and Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes at the sight of so much love gathered in one place. The party lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and countless toasts to the happy couple. Person after person came forward to share stories about how Ethan and Natalie had helped them over the years, whether through lending equipment, offering advice, or simply being good neighbors. "You too are proof that good people still exist in this world," the minister said in his toast. "You built something remarkable here, not just in land and cattle, but in family and community. May you have many more years together." As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Natalie and Ethan found themselves once again on their porch, the same place where they had shared so many conversations over the years. 20 years, Natalie mused. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." 20 years since you agreed to a business arrangement with a difficult cowboy," Ethan said, pulling her close. 20 years since that difficult cowboy kissed me and forgot all about Pretense," she corrected with a smile. He laughed, the sound deep and warm and familiar. "I never stood a chance against you, did I?" "Not really," she agreed. "Though to be fair, I did not stand much chance against you either. We were doomed from the start." "Doomed to happiness," he said, kissing the top of her head. "What a terrible fate." She turned in his arms to face him properly, taking in the lines that time and sun had carved into his handsome face, the silver threading through his dark hair, the green eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "If I could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, I would make the same choice in a heartbeat. Even knowing how stubborn I would be, how difficult." His tone was teasing, but she heard the genuine question beneath it. "Especially knowing that," she confirmed. "Because I also know how loyal you are, how devoted, how you would move mountains for the people you love, how you read poetry to our children at night and cry at weddings and still bring me flowers from the hills for no reason." "You make me sound like a romantic," he complained, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You are a romantic," she insisted. "You just hide it under layers of practicality and rancher pragmatism." "Well, you bring it out of me." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. 20 more years, Natalie, and 20 after that. As many as we can get." "As many as we can get," she echoed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The years that followed brought their share of challenges, as all years do. There were droughts that tested the ranch's resources, winters that proved harder than expected, illnesses that scared them all until they passed. But through everything, Natalie and Ethan faced it together, their partnership forged in those early days of awkward pretense and honest vulnerability proving stronger than steel. Their children grew, and eventually began marrying and having children of their own. Thomas brought home a bright, capable woman from Carson City who fell in love with ranch life as completely as he was. Caroline married a young lawyer from Silver Peak who had the good sense to recognize that he was getting the better end of the deal. William and Sarah were still young, but already there were prospects on the horizon, young people who caught their eyes and made Natalie and Ethan exchange knowing glances. The first grandchild arrived when Natalie was 45, a squalling baby girl that Thomas and his wife named Emily. Watching Ethan hold his granddaughter for the first time, his face transformed with wonder and love, Natalie felt her heart could not possibly hold any more joy without bursting. "Look at her," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "She is perfect." "Like her grandfather," Natalie said softly, moving to stand beside him. "Like her grandmother," he corrected, looking up at her with those green eyes that had captured her heart so many years ago. "Thank you, Natalie, for all of this. For saying yes to an arrangement that should have been cold and temporary. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself. For building this family with me." "Thank you for letting me in," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "For choosing love over fear. For being everything I needed even when I did not know what that was." More grandchildren followed over the years, until the ranch house was once again filled with the sounds of children, this time a generation removed but no less precious. Ethan proved to be a doting grandfather, teaching his grandchildren about the land and animals just as he had taught their parents, passing down the knowledge and love that had been the foundation of the double Artiquette's success. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw another party, this one even larger than the 20th. The Double R had become something of a legend in Nevada, a success story that people pointed to as an example of what was possible with hard work, intelligence, and partnership. But for Natalie and Ethan, standing together in the midst of the celebration, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, the real success was simpler and more profound. They had taken a desperate business arrangement and transformed it into a life full of love and meaning. They had healed each other's wounds and built something that would last beyond their own lives. "No regrets," Ethan murmured in her ear as they swayed together to music played by a local band. "Not a single one," she replied firmly. "Though I do wonder sometimes what Henderson would think if he could see us now." "He would probably take credit for the whole thing," Ethan said with a laugh. "Claim he knew all along that we were perfect for each other." "Maybe he did," Natalie suggested. "Maybe there was more to his matchmaking than just practical business sense. Or maybe we just got extraordinarily lucky." She looked up at him, at the man who had been her husband for 3 decades, who knew her better than anyone else in the world, who could still make her heart race with a single look. "I do not believe in luck," she said softly. "I believe in choices. And we chose each other, every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." He kissed her then, in front of everyone, a kiss that spoke of 30 years of marriage and the promise of however many more they would be granted. Their children whistled and applauded, their grandchildren giggled, and the crowd erupted in cheers. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Natalie saw happy tears on more than one face in the crowd. Their love story had become part of the community's history, a tale told to illustrate that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. As the years continued their inexorable march, Natalie and Ethan grew older together with grace and gratitude. Their hair turned silver, their faces lined with the evidence of years spent squinting into the sun and laughing with grandchildren. Their bodies became less spry, requiring more rest and care, but their love only deepened, aged like fine wine into something rich and complex and irreplaceable. They eventually handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Thomas and his family, though they remained active advisors and constant presences on the land they had built together. Ethan still rode out most mornings, though now accompanied by grandchildren eager to hear his stories. Natalie still played piano in the evenings, now teaching the next generation the same songs her mother had taught her. On the evening of their 40th anniversary, they sat once again on the porch that had witnessed so many of their conversations over the years. The house behind them was full of family, multiple generations gathered to celebrate, but they had stolen a moment alone to watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and rose. 40 years, Natalie said softly, her hand clasped in Ethan's. Where did the time go? Into this, he replied, gesturing at the ranch spread out before them, at the house full of family behind them. Into every day we chose each other, into every challenge we faced together, into building something that will last long after we are gone. Do you remember that first day I came here? She asked. How terrified I was, how certain that I was making either the best or worst decision of my life. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, he said, coming all this way to marry a stranger for practical reasons. Facing an uncertain future with nothing but courage and determination. I remember thinking you were impossibly handsome, she admitted with a small laugh, and then immediately being angry at myself for noticing, because it was supposed to be purely business. I noticed you too, he confessed. The way you held your head high despite being frightened, the intelligence in your eyes, the strength in how you negotiated terms rather than just accepting whatever I offered. I knew then that you were someone special, even though I tried to deny it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the mountains and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sounds of their family, the grandchildren's laughter, the murmur of adult conversation, the clink of dishes being prepared for dinner. I would do it all again, Natalie said quietly. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it exactly the same because it led us here. So would I, Ethan agreed, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles, though maybe with a little less stubbornness on my part. I like your stubbornness, she protested. It matches mine perfectly, he laughed, the sound carrying into the peaceful evening. We are quite a pair, are not we, the best pair, she confirmed. You know what I think about sometimes, that telegram from Henderson. What if I had not been desperate enough to respond? What if I had found some other solution to my family's debts? Then I suppose I would have found some other woman willing to enter a business arrangement, Ethan said slowly, and I would have gone through with the plan. I would have gotten my water rights and maintained my practical, lonely existence. I probably would have called it enough, convinced myself I was content. But, Natalie prompted, hearing the unspoken continuation, but I would never have known what I was missing. I would never have understood what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life with them. I would have survived, but I would not have lived. Not really. His hand tightened on hers. You taught me how to live again, Natalie, how to open my heart after I had locked it away for protection. You showed me that the risk of pain is worth the reward of love. She felt tears gather in her eyes, even after 40 years together, still moved by his words. And you gave me a home, not just this ranch, but a place where I belonged completely, where I could be strong and vulnerable, capable and cared for, all at the same time. They rose together, his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing, and made their way back into the house where their family waited. The anniversary dinner was a joyous affair, with multiple generations crowded around an extended table, passing dishes and sharing stories and creating new memories. Later, when the guests had finally departed and the house had grown quiet, Natalie and Ethan prepared for bed in the room they had shared for so many years. As she brushed out her silver hair, she caught his reflection in the mirror, watching her with an expression of such love and contentment that it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, turning to face him. "Just remembering," he said, coming to stand behind her. "The first night you spent in this house, staying in the eastern wing in those rooms I had prepared for my business arrangement wife. I lay awake in my own rooms, already wanting you but refusing to admit it, telling myself it was just physical attraction that would fade." "And did it fade?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "Not even a little," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It only grew stronger. Every day, every year, loving you became easier and more essential. You are woven into every part of me now, Natalie. I cannot imagine existing without you." "Good thing you will not have to," she said firmly, turning in his arms. "We still have years ahead of us. Time to watch more grandchildren grow up, maybe even meet great-grandchildren. Time to continue this adventure we started all those years ago." They settled into bed together, her head on his shoulder, their bodies fitted together with the ease of decades of practice. As she drifted towards sleep, Natalie thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate telegram to this moment of perfect peace, from strangers bound by necessity to soulmates who could not imagine life apart. "Ethan," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yes, love. Thank you for kissing me that day by the piano. For forgetting the pretense and letting yourself feel." She felt him smile against her hair. "Thank you for being brave enough to push me into it, for refusing to let me hide behind walls. We make a good team," she whispered. "The best team," he agreed, his arms tightening around her. Now and always. As they both drifted into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms in the house they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, neither could regret a single step of the path that had brought them here. The business arrangement that should have been cold and temporary had become the foundation of a love story that would be told and retold through generations. A testament to the power of choosing courage over fear, love over loneliness, and truth over pretense. The double R would continue to thrive long after they were gone, managed by their children and grandchildren and the generations yet to come. But more than the land or the cattle or the financial success, their true legacy would be the love they had built together, starting from the most unlikely of beginnings and growing into something that would inspire their descendants for years to come. In the quiet of the Nevada night, with stars wheeling overhead and the future stretching out before them like the endless sky, Natalie and Ethan Rutherford slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found exactly what they needed in each other. What had begun as a simple business deal had become the greatest love story either of them could have imagined. Proof that sometimes the heart knows what it needs even when the mind insists on practicality. They told the town it was a business deal, but the cowboy had kissed her and forgotten the pretense entirely. And in doing so, he had found not just a wife but a partner, a best friend and the other half of his soul. And that made all the difference.